Hi, folks. Have you ever been to a Zoom meeting and the organizers of the meeting are just begging everybody to turn their cameras on, and people just don't. They don't want to. They don't do it. Maybe a few people who are easily guilt tripped. I'm one such person. Turn their cameras on, but you can tell there's like 300 people in this Zoom room, and maybe 35 of them have their cameras on. This is an example of insufficient priming. So a lot of times those people, they thought they were going to a webinar. They did not expect or something like a webinar. Like they thought someone will talk for an hour while I do my laundry. They weren't expecting for the presenters to want them to make eye contact and maybe participate in a breakout room and, uh, you know, enter their thoughts in the chat. They just thought they were gonna sign up for this Zoom thing. Maybe it's a meeting, maybe it's a webinar. That fine distinction was lost on them, and that they would, maybe listen along for a bit, maybe while they ate their lunch. And then the organizer's like, hey, everybody, turn your cameras on. And they're like, but it's really awkward for me to eat my salad in front of 300 other people. You've been there, you know. So the problem here, there may be several problems, but one of them is that the host has not primed participants. They have not set the expectations for how the organizers, how the host would like the participants to show up and act while they're there. And this is important because expectation setting is one of the, as y'all know from previous modules, is one of the 4 places that trust regularly breaks down when we don't know what other people are expecting of us. Alternatively, if they're expecting something that we think is unreasonable and they haven't given us a sufficient justification for why we really need to do that thing in that way, that's another place that trust can break down. You see this all the time in people just sort of blowing off Zoom facilitators. So if you want a meeting to go well, and you want people to behave a certain way in the gathering, then you have to tell them ahead of time. And there are both explicit and implicit ways that you can tell them, that you can start to build the social contract for how we're all going to comport ourselves in this gathering. So 5 standard ways you can do it. In the invitation itself, the invitation is a chance for them to opt in or out of coming to this gathering. And so it's a good place for you to tell them what the gathering is like. Tell them how long it will take. Tell them what to wear. Tell them if it's an expectation that their cameras be on. Tell them if you want them to bring an anecdote from their own life. Whatever it is you want them to do, tell them in the invitation so that hopefully they can opt in or out. They're not always going to be able to opt in or out. Like, let's say that you are a manager and you are asking people to show up at a staff meeting that you lead, and you're saying, today I would really like you to bring, a story of something you're proud of from your work. They're probably not going to say no, but because you're their boss, but they're still going to appreciate a heads up, preferably a timely heads up. Okay. Another way you can prime people is by sending calendar invites and reminder emails. Every time they've accepted the invitation already, but this is a time to remind them, hey, by the way, this is what I want you to do. And it's also time to set the tone. So if your tone is light and bubbly and it includes a GIF or a picture or a TikTok clip, then that primes them to show up in a playful way. Whereas if you are using very proper font or a proper tone, and you use official like insignia and logos and branding, and then you're telling them show up in a different way. Perhaps this is a good time to wear a blazer. So you can do that in invitations, but also in calendar invites and reminder emails. You can also do it by sending any preparatory documents. So that might be a meeting agenda. It might be a pre-read when you send these, make sure that you give them instructions on the level of engagement. Do you want them to know that it's there, or do you actually want them to read it in detail? You can also, this is one of the best ways to prime people, actually talk with them. So stick your head in somebody's office and say that you're looking forward to seeing them on Thursday. Or, when you bump into them at a different meeting, say, make some comment about the work that y'all have ahead of you or the play that you have ahead of you, just whatever it is. It can, if you really, the more extreme version of this is a pre-meeting. So let's say that that there's going to be 6 people at a meeting. The meeting's content is going to be bad news to some people in that meeting, and you don't want them to be totally shocked and appalled. So maybe you say, hey, can we have 30 minutes ahead of time to discuss what's going to go down? Or if you want people to do particularly strange things, like let's say you want them to dress up. That would be odd, but it's a thought. Or perhaps you want them to meet at a different location, or you want them to bring a potluck dish to share. It might not be a bad idea to maybe have a potluck dish, but like it's not a bad idea if you really feel that you're asking them to do something unusual, to sit down with them ahead of time and say, hey, here's what I want to have happen at that meeting, and here's why this is really important to me. So that's only in the most sort of tender situations, but it's an option that's on the table. Okay, so I have given you some very dry options, but I think the reading from Priya Parker below will give you a much more fun set of ideas about how to playfully prime.